leader of the third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate your comments. I think it's always good for us to try to raise the dignity of this noble institution that we are so fortunate and privileged to be a part of. I'm delighted to be speaking today to Bill 5, the Insurance Corporation Amendment Act 2021. And this bill speaks about bringing in a fairness officer, which on the surface sure sounds like a very good thing. We all want fairness in our institutions and our government services and how the public is treated. So this bill identifies the role of the fairness officer and the relationship that that officer will have with ICBC, and also identifies that the officer can, quote, make recommendations to ICBC, but it cannot, this officer will not be able to compel ICBC to take actions. The fairness officer will be appointed by cabinet, and the fairness officer will make public the type and number of issues that they hear, along with the recommendations to ICBC. Section 55 of the bill identifies how the officer will be appointed and the term of appointment, which is 3 years, and Section 56 outlines that the fairness officer may investigate decisions, acts, or procedures by ICBC. The officer may also make recommendations to ICBC to resolve fairness complaints or systemic problems with fairness and may provide advice to members of the public. There are a number of questions that we look forward to canvassing, and I'm sure hearing canvassed by the members of the official opposition during committee stage, including if the fairness officer, for example, cannot comment on amounts payable by ICBC, does this mean that any issue relating to benefits are out of scope of the officer? Also, would the officer be able to comment on services provided to claimants? It would be good to get clarification on this. Also, it would be interesting to know how this fairness officer can actually help individuals in a timely fashion if ICBC's responses only need to come a year later to the prior fiscal year. Other points that have been raised over the debate in the chamber this afternoon have been around how independent this fairness officer will be, how capable the officer will be to make any changes to decisions that have been made. And I guess for me, the question would be, would the expectation be that this fairness officer would be essentially explaining process to the public if they're unhappy with an outcome with ICBC? Or if this fairness officer can truly make sure that outcomes are indeed truly fair, what abilities will this person have to do that if they can't actually comment on outcomes in terms of financial or services? One of the things that's been talked about quite a bit this afternoon is the overall distrust for ICBC, a Crown corporation that has, as has been spoken about a few times today, had a myriad of problems over the past years. But this is not unlike a number of Crown corporations in British Columbia. ICBC, however, has a particularly crucial role to play at times in people's lives that often are life-changing moments. And so an accident that causes serious injury can be a point in a person's life that really marks a very different direction that their life might go. And so the role and responsibility that ICBC has to people is at moments when they are potentially at the most vulnerable moments in their lives. And I think that if we recognize that this Crown Corporation plays this very pivotal role in people's lives, and I think when we debated the bills last year, a lot of us heard many very personal stories about people who had been in accidents and had interactions with ICBC that were less than satisfactory, that left them feeling that this Crown Corporation didn't take care of their needs and didn't serve them at a time when they needed that more than ever. And I'm aware that the minister is making the case that we are going to see a transition from that, but I think it's really important that the changes are being questioned deeply by the members of the legislature. Other Crown corporations, and I just wanted to touch on this a little bit, but there are 29 Crown corporations in British Columbia. And those Crown corporations include BC Hydro, BC Oil and Gas Commission, the BC Lottery Corporation, and Community Living BC. And I think that we might be able to agree that we have some pretty significant and worrying issues with how Crown corporations in BC are operating. And we have this example today of a fairness officer that's being brought in to oversee the processes in claim decisions in ICBC, which indicates that there's been problems with those processes. From the BC government website, quote, Crown corporations are public sector organizations established and funded by the BC government to provide specialized goods and services to citizens. They operate at varying levels of government control and report on their planning, governance, and accountabilities. So publicly funded organizations that deliver services to the people of British Columbia. And I think that what we should be all striving for is that any of these publicly funded institutions that deliver services to the people of British Columbia are trustworthy, are organizations that we can be proud of as a province. But we've seen many examples and instances where this is not the case. There is a worrying lack and loss of trust in many of our Crown corporations in British Columbia. And we have these oversight mechanisms for these Crown corporations, but the Crown corporations don't necessarily want to operate with that oversight. Just recently, for example, BC Hydro refused outright to respond to direct questions about Site C from their oversight body, the BC Utilities Commission. Under the Oil and Gas Commission, we have seen a proliferation of abandoned and orphaned wells. So the regulatory body that is overseeing oil and gas extraction in British Columbia has also overseen a huge proliferation of abandoned wells. Just a few days ago, there was an article that came out. There's an $81 million estimate for orphan site liability from the Oil and Gas Commission statements, which in their own statements say they could go up to 116 million. And I think the people of British Columbia can say, hold on, here's a publicly funded body that is supposed to deliver goods and services to the people of British Columbia, and under their watch, they won't answer questions from oversight bodies. They have allowed these massive liabilities to grow, which ultimately fall to the taxpayers of British Columbia. We have a money laundering inquiry underway in BC, which will perhaps determine to what extent the BC Lottery Corporation did not carry out its duties to prevent money laundering in our province. And so we're talking today about a fairness officer for ICBC, but I think we should absolutely put that into the context of what our expectations of government and government bodies should be in our province. And I want to have the highest expectations. But those expectations, that trust, that goodwill actually has to be earned, it has to be maintained, and it has to be built. And all of these organizations should have at the center of their operations, at the center of their mission, public trust. Because once it's lost, it's very hard to gain it back. And we've heard in the debate this afternoon, the accusations kind of flying back and forth, which government is responsible. Ultimately, I would say we are all responsible for ensuring that these public institutions are trustworthy. And if we are hearing from the public that they do not trust these public institutions, we should take that incredibly seriously. We have a proliferation of oversight offices and officers in British Columbia. It's probably similar in other places, but just off the top of my head. We've heard it today already about the ombudsperson overseeing fair process in government services. We have the representative for children and youth. When I started in 2017, there were close to 80 reports had been written by that office about the operations of the Ministry of Children and Families. And those reports have continued to come, and yet we've seen little to no change in that ministry. We have the Auditor General, I think it was 2015 or 2016 Auditor General report on professional reliance and government oversight in the mining industry was of great interest to me at the time because of what we were seeing unfold in Shawnigan Lake. Auditor General's also written reports on safety of drinking water in British Columbia, something we should all be very concerned about. We now have the new Superintendent of Professional Governance to oversee the professional reliance model in British Columbia to ensure that the regulators of qualified professionals are carrying out their duties to ensure that the public is being fairly served and properly served. And reports come out from these oversight agencies and offices, and yet we see a lack of urgency to address the very serious and often systemic issues that are identified in these reports. And I think that as we debate a bill like Bill 5 and a fairness officer for a crown corporation, I think it's important for us to recognize that we might have a larger systemic issue that we're looking at here, which is that our institutions are needing more and more oversight because there are more and more examples of the public feeling that they are not being served by these publicly funded institutions that are meant to exist to serve the public. And so I look forward to committee stage of this bill, and I will continue to advocate for all of us remembering that service to the public and trust of the people of this province needs to be at the center of everything we are doing in here. If it's a small change to an act or if it is a complete overhaul of how a system works, in both cases we need to be mindful of the people that we serve. Thank you.